Hello and welcome everyone to today's webinar, Accelerate Your DevSecOps Journey to the Cloud. I see a few more attendees logging in, so we'll just begin in a few minutes to get everyone a chance to get settled. Thank you. Good day, everyone, and welcome. My name is Erin McKaylee, Marketing Campaign Manager at DLT, where we accelerate public sector growth for technology companies. Today, I have the pleasure of being your host for today's webinar. Before we get started, we're just going to go over a few housekeeping items. Your lines are muted for the duration of the event. However, you're encouraged to drop any questions throughout the presentation in the Q&A field. If you have any technical questions, please message Felicia Cortez directly in the chat. The recording will be available following the presentation, so please be sure to check out your email that you used to sign up with. Lastly, we will have live polls throughout the presentation to hear from you and additional resources available in the handout section of the GoToWebinar toolbar. And now I will hand it off to Amato with DLT.
Hi, hello everyone. Thank you for attending our webinar today to help you understand the value of DevSecOps orchestration. My name is Amato Stellato. I am the Partner Development Manager for DLT Solutions. Real quick about DLT, for over 30 years, DLT has been the premier government solutions aggregator that specializes in understanding and solving the public sector's IT business challenges. DLT expertise focuses on the 6 core technologies as you see on the slide here. These are strategically crafted around how our technology partners go to market to solve these challenges. Your path to the cloud is as specific as your mission, and yet the challenges you face are probably not unique. DLT and Cornerstone experience in implementing cloud solutions will help you get past some of the most common obstacles so you can continue to leverage the cloud to modernize, innovate, and maximize your mission delivery. Cornerstone Solution provides a framework that U.S. federal agencies have used today to consistently deploy high-quality, scalable, resilient, and secure software throughout the entire application's lifecycle. So let's pass it on over to our Cornerstone technology solution provider and introduce you to the president and veteran, Gary Schaefer.
Thank you, Amato. I appreciate the introduction. And thank you all for attending today's webinar. I know it is difficult to get on people's calendars, and I know that this does take out some time out of your day and a little bit of webinar burnout too, I think, over the last 2 years. So I do appreciate you actually taking the time to listen to us. As Amato mentioned, I am the founder and also co-founder of the TruStacks Devops Orchestration platform that we're going to talk a little bit about today, and how we can potentially help you understand how to accelerate your DevSecOps journey. Also with me is Aaron Fowler. He's on the other side of the table across from me here. He is the account manager in our business development representation here today. In case you're wondering why the video looks a little different than the picture, to keep a long story short, you may have heard of this sequel movie that's been out the last 2 weeks called Top Gun Maverick. So between my coworkers and even my own wife, a few of us were dared to go with the full mustache. So I think we ended up with a little more Reno than we did Top Gun, but you know, I'm just going to fully embrace it for the next until the beard grows back in. So again, thank you guys for taking the time, and we'll go ahead and hop right into this. So this is my only architecture slide, I promise. So who is Cornerstone? May have heard of us before, maybe not. We are a solutions focused, veteran owned company. I often like to say that we have an against the grain mentality as well. Not all of our partners like what I'm about to say, but I'm going to say it. We just don't like selling you something just because we think you need it. We actually do pay attention to your mission at hand and exactly where you are in your journey. Just because I could, we could try to implement something that, you may not be ready for, doesn't mean we should. And that really plays into our service with integrity motto as well. We're not going to try to push something on you that you're not ready for and just further complicate, your journey, whether that's cloud, your cloud migration journey, your DevOps solutions, different tools, implementations, depending on where you are on that spectrum, we want to make sure that we have the correct solutions in place for you and bring the best of breed technologies together to accomplish your goals, not just ours. And I can say the same thing for DLT as well. All right, so hopping right into it. DevOps is broken. May or may not have had the sentiment before. Any DevOps training you've ever had will tell you DevOps is not a product. DevOps is not something that quote unquote needs to be solved, right? It was supposed to be, and its mantra still is bringing dev and ops together and actually facilitating communication between those two teams. And I know this sounds a little bit old hat. This is a concept that's been around since around 07, 08, I believe, especially once Kubernetes containerized applications came around, cloud native applications began to, kind of come into existence, cloud migrations, all of that. It was really there to facilitate dev and ops working together. And of course, you can add in the sec part of that as well, getting dev, ops, and security actually working hand in hand. We say DevOps is broken now because it has become so complex that if the original idea was to bring dev and ops together, what we now need this additional mythical position called the DevOps engineer. And I'm not saying DevOps engineers are a bad thing, but the fact that things have become so complex that we need someone that can maintain those integrations between what the development team needs and the operations team needs, I think it's a bit broken. We've gotten a little too, we've gone too far down the path of making things overly complicated, I think. And I think it's about time the industry starts reeling some of that back in. And very similar trends have happened in the past as well. We had back when virtualization was big in the early 2000s, VMware came out, we had things like VM sprawl, and then we had to try to bring it all back. Now we have containerization that's kind of happening again. And then add in security requirements, and it's just this evolving level of complexity. So how do we fix it? And I think before we get into how we fix it, how do we get here? And I think one of the reasons we got here is, especially in government, the running, not joke, but the running narrative is, the government's 10 years behind industry. So how do we keep pace with industry trends, with things like cloud native DevOps, serverless architecture, AI and ML is huge right now in the federal government. Microservices architecture is still, in a lot of cases, not being implemented correctly, from our point of view, whenever we talk to customers. So when you're trying to keep up with the industry trend, a lot of things get missed along the way, and a lot of times we no longer have the time to actually go back and address those inefficiencies or address the process. So we keep trying to shove technology into maybe an antiquated process or something we weren't quite ready to maintain. Maybe we don't need to think about serverless architecture. Maybe we need to look at zero automation first, right? Again, depends on where you're at in your journey on that spectrum. But you kind of need to figure out where your organization is and what is the next step, right? To eventually get to that end goal. So I think this right here introduces a lot of complexity when you're trying to tackle everything at once. Some of the common DevOps challenges that we hear, that when you're trying to implement DevOps, we often say that, some organizations can do well with a DevOps reset. And a lot of that is because of, you have to change your culture in order to implement DevOps correctly. And a lot of times there's lack of standards, lack of best practices. There's always the mentality that we've always done it this way. That's always been a culture from even my time in federal government as a Marine, and also doing a lot of government contracting over the years, and with Red Hat Consulting and Microsoft implementations and things like that. And adopting best practices and modern technologies is a big hindrance as kind of the keeping up with industry trends mindset. And even especially post-COVID, just that the hiring and talent costs and the attrition, trying to keep people in this culture that you're trying to create in these teams is rather difficult, especially over the last year or so. And we run into this situation where between the people, the process, and the technology, it's all kind of clashing together a little bit, and it's making things difficult to try to maintain a proper DevOps practice, if you will, or a process, right? So those are some of the common challenges, and we all have problems. We've all got budget constraints. We're all trying to modernize in our own way, whether that's something as simple as hardware refreshes or cloud migrations, which I know many of you on this call have already gone through or are going through a major cloud migration, up to AWS, Azure, what have you. So, and getting your applications up there is a great first step, because now you've taken your application and given it some additional capabilities, kind of once you're in the cloud. But there's problems that come with that. There's budgetary constraints. How do you standardize all of that? And that's at a very high level, but where the rubber meets the road as far as your app dev teams are concerned, your developers have their own issues. Because of this complexity and trying to keep up with industry trends and trying to integrate security into the process, a lot of development teams have way too much technical debt. They're configuring tools more often than they should. They should be committing code 80 to 90% of the time, or more than that, right? They really should just be 100% of the time. Your business is your application, not the tools that make it run. Because of the pace at which things are moving, you have some limited security guardrails in the development process. You have a higher time to value. How long does it take to onboard that new developer, et cetera, right? And how quickly is it to onboard new team members and that kind of thing? What does that time frame look like? Best practices often get overlooked. We don't always, we have an internal process that we need to meet, but then we kind of forget to go back and look at what was the intent of the industry best practice for this development framework or this type of web application. And because of all of this, there's usually lack of time for the innovation side of the house. So what's the next thing within your organization? And we actually do have a question that Aaron's going to pull up as well. Aaron, go ahead. Yeah, so what is your biggest DevOps challenge? And these are some of the familiar ones that we've polled over the last couple months, and we've gotten some interesting feedback, and we kind of wanted to get yours as well. We'll give you guys here a few seconds.
Looks like we have 17% voted so far. We'll just give it another few seconds here.
Sure. And we do try to keep these, as light as possible. If you guys have any questions, even outside of this, please feel free to enter those in chat as well, and they will interrupt me accordingly. Okay, interesting. Lack of standards and best practices. That's very common, actually. I think that's been our top one the last couple times we posted it. So that's very interesting. Okay. Yeah. So how do we get back to creating standards and best practices? I know government especially is very big on SOPs and things like that, and those are long drawn out documented processes, right? But how do we automate that instead? And I think that's a good thing to focus on here as we move forward with this presentation. So with all of those problems, the idea of a secure software factory, if you've never heard of it before, I'm going to go over it very briefly. But the idea of a secure software factory, I would argue, was actually brought up by DLT and Red Hat. I can't really tell which one came up with it first. I think it was a conversation DLT's now chief technologist Rick Stewart and Red Hat came up with during a conversation of how do we bring the correct vendors, you know, as DLT being an aggregator of technology for public sector, how do we bring the right vendor to each step in that development process, or even the planning process, even which tools are available to us? Because as I mentioned before, you know, the running narrative is the government's so far behind, I just need something I can, you know, get implemented now. For some organizations, some of them need to take, you know, smaller steps, but for some, they're just so far behind, they have to kind of start from scratch. So the idea of a secure software factory, and there's different definitions for it depending on who you talk to, but it was, again, to bring options to each step, bring the right vendor to each step, and provide a framework to where DevOps practices can be facilitated. So you have modern technology, you know, it kind of worked in reverse. We provide the technology to support your process, and then hopefully you get a good culture out of that. And it was a good guide for developing microservices, you know, taking these big monolithic applications that commercial and government still have within the industries, and breaking them up into their smaller parts, and how do you manage all of that, and bringing the right tools to the table is a good first step. So what happens is you say, okay, I'm going to deploy my own software factory. I'm going to go find, you know, maybe one that's out there now, like a platform one or something like that. You still need, you know, from organization to organization, you still need a lot of the same tools, right? You have to be able to do, you know, SAST, bill of materials. You still need a CI tool. You need version control. You need to choose a cloud. You need a planning tool. You need all of these things. And not only do you need all of them, but from customer to customer, from software team to software team, somebody still has to make it all work together. Someone still has to integrate it, and that takes time. Again, we're really focusing here on, you know, configuring tools and getting them actually working together before we even start talking about our code. And this is, and from customer to customer, we've done a lot of consulting as well. And the idea of, you know, constantly redeploying the same technology from customer A to customer B to customer C seems very repetitive. So how do we eliminate this from happening? And we actually have another question for you, which Aaron's going to bring up. So if you were to onboard a new developer today, how long would it take before they commit their first line of code? And I'm not just talking about the HR onboarding. I'm saying once they have their laptop in hand, how long would it take to get your developers to a point where they can confidently commit their first line of code and it would actually be pushed into production and fully automated? What does that look like for you?
I see results coming in. I'll just give it another few seconds to close it out.
Sure. Okay, that seems about par as well. So weeks, not sure. Yeah, so generally that's what we see is weeks. And a lot of that has to do with not having standards in place. So when a developer comes in, how do you onboard that person? What does that common development environment look like, if you even have one? If you have to spin up virtual machines for that person, and then what is the maintenance of all of that? Is somebody constantly maintaining a quote unquote golden image and all of that? So how do we reduce that time to value a little bit, not just for developer onboarding, but for the whole process, which we'll get into as well. So with these challenges, you want to go down the secure software factory route. You want to go down this DevSecOps route. So you procure all the tools you need, you deploy a tool chain infrastructure, right? So you have a cloud provider, you have a tool chain, you have everything you need. Now you need to go build a pipeline, right? And you can look at the screen here and you can just imagine all three of these options being 3 separate development teams, or even 3 separate organizations. One could be VA, one could be Navy, one could be Army, right? And now that you have the tools, you now need to build a pipeline. And before your code, you now need to build the pipeline to actually take advantage of those tools. So if you're using Azure DevOps, you now need to integrate in the Azure DevOps way these tools. You need to go in and create these steps to be able to support the build, the test, the release, deploy stages, right? And actually have those tools facilitate that process. If you're using Jenkins, same thing. GitLab, same thing. You're reinventing the wheel now 3 times just on this one slide. I would say between all of the customers that we work with, I would say about 80% of their pipelines are doing exactly the same thing. But yet for some reason, we hold on to this automation of our pipelines almost like our IP. Your pipeline is not your IP, it's your code. Focus on your code, not the integrations. And that's our mentality as far as where we're trying to take, the next step, with our customers is how do we help you focus more on your business value versus all of this technology and all of the steps that need to get it. So where do you start? Where do you start? And for us, it kind of boils down to 3 things. It boils down to people, process, and technology. And the one thing I cannot, I or anyone else, any other company cannot sell you or provide you, this is something that you have to build within your organization, is culture. Do you have the right team? Do you have the right team members? Do you have the right environment for them to thrive in? Are you supporting your developers? And not just your developers, but your security, your ops, all of that, right? But how do you create a culture where those barriers are broken down, they can communicate with each other, and you truly try to implement a DevOps process? That is something we can potentially help facilitate through things like, a 3-month workshop and getting your teams actually trying to work together and all of that. But you can't buy this. This has to be built within the organization and from the ground up. This is not something that we can just say, hey, you're now doing DevOps. And we do run into some customers that they implement an automation strategy, or they implement some pretty cool CICD things with their pipelines and a little bit of automation, and then they say, hey, we're doing DevOps. Unless you've broken down the silos between the teams, you're not doing DevOps, or at least you're not doing it correctly. And this is another reason why we say DevOps is broken. So DevOps, if we go back to the original definition, and this one's from Red Hat, it's an approach to culture, automation, and platform design intended to deliver increased business value and responsiveness through rapid, high quality, and I'll even add secure service delivery in here as well. So we kind of have to get back to what DevOps was intended to be, I think. And I know that's hard with some, either it's antiquated best practices or, well, this is the way we've always done it mentality. I know that's really difficult. But until we overcome that, doing it properly is really difficult. And then the next thing I think you need is to understand you do need orchestration. You do need automation as part of this. How do we get rid of a lot of these manual tasks and a lot of these repetitive manual tasks that we're doing on a day-to-day basis or monthly, yearly? We need to spin up a new application. All of those things. How do we create orchestration to help facilitate a better DevSecOps practice? So once you figure out these 2 things, you're going to have to come to a decision. Are you going to create this orchestration or this platform, your development platform yourself? Or are you going to consume what you can and put your little piece of magic on it? Because I will say, every organization we've worked with, like I said, 80 to 90% of their pipelines are exactly the same. There's still that small 5-10% that is truly a differentiator between 2 different organizations. Like maybe you have this requirement that you have to have, and you'll always hear it from us. Our favorite question is always why, and we will usually, we get some kickback from that a lot, but we always ask why, because we'll have customers that say, well, I have to use this tool, or I have to go create this thing manually. Why? There's already a solution for it. Why not just go consume it? So you have to come to a decision where, are we going to create a platform, or am I going to create these resources, or is there something out there that I can consume and again, reduce time to value, reduce complexity, and focus on what matters, which is your business. Going out and creating your own cloud, unless it's absolutely necessary, if it's something like an IL 5-6 kind of thing, which even now with Azure, that's not even a conversation really you have to have anymore. You really want to maintain your own IL 5 data center or your own IL 6 cloud, and manage your own, maybe Red Hat OpenStack or something like that? Or would you rather go consume one that already exists, whether it's AWS GovCloud or Azure, Azure Government as well? Again, you kind of want to lean more towards the consumption model in most cases. There are very few circumstances where you should be thinking about creating your own solutions. We have another question here as well, Aaron. Yeah, so for the attendees today, what percentage of your applications are running in the cloud? I know there's quite a few from VA as well, and I know that they have, or they've already undergone a large cloud migration as well. Just kind of curious what that percentage looks like.
All right, looks like people were quick on the mouse, so we got our results here. So we'll go ahead and close it out.
Okay, interesting. That's also pretty standard, I think, as well, because cloud has been talked about for a long time, of course, and I know there's been a lot of government push to, public sector push to really get things at least moved up there. And the beauty about that is, even if you just straight migrated your applications from on-premise to the cloud, at least now your application is in an environment where you can consume additional functionality within that cloud, whether it's some kind of AI ML connector, right, to push data to and do some analytics on what you already have, different API solutions, function as a service, so maybe some serverless integrations, that kind of thing. At least now you're in an environment where you can take advantage of that consumption model a little bit more. You don't have to go create your own serverless architecture. You don't have to go create your own SQL database servers anymore either. You can migrate that into an Azure SQL or even a cloud agnostic SQL solution as well. So you have options there. But again, you want to go a little bit more into this consumption model where you can. So with that in mind, the idea behind TruStacks, again, there's Cornerstone Technical Solutions, which is, the services side of our business. We've been in business for about 10 years now. And TruStacks was really the culmination of our experiences of working with different vendors like Microsoft, Microsoft Azure, Red Hat Consulting, and doing some other work with DLT as well in the past of, we kind of came to the realization that we're doing the same thing over and over and over. And how do we implement best practices and automate them once so no one will ever have to do it again? And that was really the goal behind TruStacks. And this platform is constantly evolving over the last 2 years or so. So how do you come up with an orchestration platform that can get most customers at least 60% of the way there? So we deploy the tool chain, consolidate the tool chain, and implement best practices, on a platform, or at least at a bare minimum, provide the tools needed to support that process and consolidate it all and standardize it. Or would you rather go do it yourself? And that's, again, another decision point you would have to make. You can create it yourself or find a platform that may work for you. And this was kind of the initial idea behind even a platform one, and that's a whole other conversation. But they realized having a platform that is secure, modern, constantly, it just makes everything available for your application teams to consume. So it was a consumption-based approach. So there are two things that actually made this possible, and there are two industry trends over the last 2 years that really helped push this idea of DevOps orchestration kind of to the forefront, at least for us. Initially for us, it was all about taking that secure software factory model that you saw on the DLT slide, bringing the right vendors to each step in the process. We went one step beyond that and said, let's focus on the outcome. So you need SAST, you need DAST, you need bill of materials. Let's take some of the industry best tools and just deploy those automatically. So we can deploy a secure software factory in about 30 minutes inside of Azure right now. That's not a problem. And then we can also support and maintain that platform. In the last 1.5 to 2 years, these two industry trends have really focused, or it's helped us refocus our efforts on the developer workflow. And there's an open source project called Ploygos that really helped drive the standards. So especially for DoD, as part of the I think it's called Dead Sword requirements document, and we can actually share that out as well. Aaron, I did not give that to you to attach to the GoToWebinar, but essentially the idea behind Ploygos was for DoD and for the government, and even for commercial. Now it's expanded into FSI customers that we've had the privilege of being on calls with. Is the Ploygos framework says your code will go through these steps in the process. So if you have a Java app, a .NET app, a React front end, whatever that is, this code will go through the exact same process every single time, according to industry best practices. And every step was fully automated in that process. So you don't have to think about that anymore. The tools are already integrated with our secure software factory, and these workflows will be created according to industry best practices. So if a workflow doesn't exist today, we can create it once, like I mentioned, and after that, no one will ever have to create it again, because the steps that are needed will be baked into that development workflow. We may have to tweak it as things evolve and change, but you won't have to rewrite that industry best practice workflow again. The second thing that came out, if anyone on the call has ever heard of a man called Solomon Hykes. Solomon is the man that created Docker, and there is now a project out there called Dagger, and this is essentially the engine that will push your code through that best practices workflow. So Ploygos kind of created the standard of how your code should be pushed through, and under the hood we now use Dagger to actually push that code through those steps. And what this does is it gives us a way to abstract even the CI tool, because we're of the belief tools are a means to an end. You shouldn't have to use a specific tool just because, and this goes back to my earlier comment, we'll always ask, well, why do you have to use that tool? Because if there's a tool already in the factory that can do it for you, and it does it well according to the outcome that you need, why bother implementing anything else? So we often get caught up on, well, I have to use GitLab or I have to use Azure DevOps. And for government, we do push Azure DevOps kicking off the Dagger engine. But outside of that, we're basically abstracting away the CI tool itself. So we can create the step once and use it anywhere. We create the SAST step, the bill of materials step, and we can use it on any CI tool. So going back to this slide, right? We have our CICD process, we've got our pipelines. Whether you're in Azure DevOps, Jenkins, or GitLab, it's all the same thing. However, this time, we can run CICD anywhere. We create the step once. So step A is linting, or B is compile for a specific language, right? We create that step one time, and we just call it from any one of these CI tools. We're no longer locked into a specific vendor CI tool. And now also the community can contribute even more to these steps and make them more robust and more standardized overall. And now we're able to actually take advantage of the industry best practices themselves and focus on that versus a specific CI integration or something like that. So our goal with the TruStacks platform is to bring together the best practices, and we're focusing on frameworks. So today we currently have the React workflow as our reference architecture right now, and that's what we're really starting to base everything else off of. And we're working with some other organizations right now to build out .NET. I believe we have Python in the pipeline as well, and Golang is already underway as well. But we're trying to get these best practices fully automated inside of a workflow that can be called from anywhere. So we're trying to take industry best practices and fully automate them so you can consume them. The next step in this process over the next few months is actually bringing best practices workflows and compliance completely together. And we want to do all of this on top of Azure. And I'll explain why here in another slide or two. But essentially what we're trying to do now is, okay, we have an industry best practices workflow for Java Maven or .NET, but you also have a NIST requirement or a PCI requirement or a HIPAA requirement. let's tack that on to the end of that workflow as well to make sure we're meeting those needs and fully automating that. And the nice thing about framework-driven development and compliance-driven development is there's standards. So if there's a standard, we can automate what those standards are. And we can actually bring those together into what we call a TruStacks developer workflow. Okay, so why Azure? Why are we here? And why is Microsoft on here? There's a few reasons why. I think number one for us is just familiarity with Microsoft in general. And not to mention, I do think they have a lot more to offer than just say, just an AWS GovCloud. There's not a complete knock against AWS. For us, it's just, I think ease of use is there, familiarity with, the terminology. Microsoft has been in public sector for a really long time. Things like Azure AD just make more sense for a lot of organizations. And they also have a little bit more, I think, in regards to the number of regions and the different impact levels and things like that. They've really accelerated and put a lot of time and effort and resources into their public sector offerings. So that's really why we chose to deploy inside of Azure. And the way that we do this to be able to support all of this is, we are an Azure CSP, so we are a cloud solutions provider for Microsoft. And the beauty about this is we're able to deploy this directly into your cloud and manage not just the TruStacks platform, but if we also are your CSP, we can manage the Azure resources all around it. So we basically become your first line of support as well for anything that happens within Azure. So what we do is we deploy, just a little bit of technical, I think that's only one slide. We deploy, you come to our UI, you fill out a form, you basically give us a temporary Azure credential. What do you want the name of your factory to be? What is it that you, which workflow will you be using? And that'll determine which tools actually get installed. And you hit deploy. And when you deploy, we're basically spinning up the Azure Kubernetes service. We're managing the DNS zone for you. We're already setting up between all of the tools, the multi-factor authentication, the single sign-on, a lot of those day one tasks that you would normally do, day one and then even day two, because we'll also be managing things. A lot of those are already taken care of for you. HashiCorp Vault, your CI tool, if you need one, we can deploy that for you inside the factory as well. A lot of companies already have it, or a lot of organizations already have their own CI, so we can just kick off our workflows using your own. Certificate manager, all of these tools are already fully integrated and deployed on top of the Azure Kubernetes service. And you have a TruStacks factory on your cloud. And by having control over this, we can also, you actually have the ability to manage those components. So now you're standardizing the tool set and you're consolidating your tool set, because tool overload is real. I mean, we have some development teams in the same company using different SaaS tools or different secrets management processes. We're trying to consolidate all of that so we don't have to worry about it anymore. You get that single pane of glass type of dashboard where, let's say Keycloak needs an update, you can go ahead and upgrade it, right? And the whole factory is, we'll only make that upgrade available when we know it's going to work with everything else that's in that workflow. And that's kind of the goal there, is to kind of bring all of that management under one umbrella. And that's just on the toolchain side. And again, the other reason why Azure and why AKS is the fact that we can deploy inside of Azure Kubernetes service, as you see here on this end, is Azure Kubernetes service, that is the kind of de facto for deploying a lot of these tools anyway. I'm sorry, just Kubernetes in general, but getting all the way up to IL2, IL4, IL5, and even now IL6, which was kind of recent. Azure Kubernetes service can deploy anywhere. Now, does that mean TruStacks will be completely ATO'd all the way up to that point? Depends on who your CISO is, if they're acceptant of those controls that are already in there. Whatever goes on top of it, that part of it would probably have to be ATO'd. But again, we have this capability and we inherit a lot of the controls that are already inside of Azure as well. And there's a complete services list as well. We can point you to the right URL to kind of look at that. But again, Azure has a lot of their services already up to IL4.5, which can't be said for some of the other cloud providers right now. So at the end of the day, kind of going back to the developer workflow, we want to really focus on the developer, have the TruStacks platform. It's fully managed for you. And what we want is the developer to just worry about their code. So the developer brings their code. When they push, we want to take care of every stage of the process for you. Everything from unit test, linting, the test phase, right? So we'll make sure that that container gets created. You don't have to know anything about Kubernetes to develop here. That's the other big thing, is the workflow will create the container, we'll scan the container, we'll help you write load tests. That's the one thing we have to kind of work with your developers on, is how to properly load test your own applications. Excuse me, we bring in some best practices like automatic semantic versioning. We'll package the artifacts. If it's a traditional type of application, we can create some Ansible automation in your workflow. This is kind of that 5 to 10% that might be custom for you. If you're not yet in containers, we can create a workflow that works for you to deploy to VMs as well, or another type of function, function as a service, or even serverless workloads. We can build those workflows if they don't exist today. But again, once we build it once, we don't ever have to build it again, and you won't have to build it again, and we'll fully support it as well after that. And then of course there's the operate monitor stage. Because of the Azure CSP relationship, where you're actually able to have that access with DLT. Actually, when you do sign up for Azure CSP, you also get that level, that first line of support. You're calling us, not Microsoft directly, because their wait times, especially since COVID, have been really inflated over the last couple of years. And just the workloads, just it's expanding so quickly. But we're actually able to work with you and help on those day 2 operations as well. Where needed, we can help integrate the entire platform end to end. And again, when a pipeline fails, if it's a step in the process, if it's a TruStacks workflow that either we built for you or it's one that you consume, something happens in that workflow, something happens in the factory with a tool, right, or an upgrade process failed, you're calling us. You don't have to bother your team with trying to troubleshoot exactly what happened and why things are not working. So if I had to say there were 3 things to take away, and I do appreciate your guys' time here, there's 3 big takeaways. I would say the first thing to address is people, right? Make sure you have the right team, make sure you have the right kind of culture implemented, and really focus on the people. And that's the one thing, I can't sell you, I can't do anything with. People is a big, is the largest part of this to be successful in DevSecOps in general, or any initiative for that matter. If you can't get the people thing right, then focus on your process, even before the technology. Make sure that whether they're organizational rule changes that need to happen, or whatever that is, and I know that's difficult in government, I understand that, but if you can get people fixed, you can figure out, at least define what your process is, even currently, before you even iterate on that. Focus on what your process is, and then fit your technology to actually fit the process, not the other way around. Don't try to fit a process to technology. Don't do it the other way, because it doesn't usually pan out very well. So again, people, process, and technology in that order, and I think that's a good first step to being successful here. All right, and thank you guys for your time. Erin, did you want to close us out here?
Yes, wonderful. Thank you so much, Gary, for enlightening us with the presentation and some serious guidance there on DevOps and TruStacks capabilities. And thank you to those who participated as well in the polls. So as a reminder, today's session was recorded and will be provided in your mailbox shortly. For any information on DLT, you can see we have our email address up there, azure@dlt.com, for more information. And if you do have a minute, I think feedback is always a gift. If you could please fill out our survey that will appear when we close out of the event, that would be wonderful to consider for the next time. And that includes our webinar. So thank you all again for joining, and we hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Thanks again, Gary and Erin.
Thank you.